The snow had started falling around 6 in the evening, and by 8 o'clock the city looked like someone had draped it in a white blanket. Christmas lights twinkled from every building, and somewhere in the distance carolers were singing. It was the kind of night that made people want to rush home to their families, to warm fires and hot cocoa and the sound of children laughing. But Robert Chen sat alone in his penthouse apartment, 30 floors above all of that joy, watching the snow fall like he was watching a movie that didn't quite hold his interest anymore. He was 52 years old, and for the past 15 years this had been his Christmas Eve tradition. Just him, a glass of expensive scotch, and the city lights stretching out below his floor-to-ceiling windows. No tree, no decorations, no family. He told himself he preferred it this way. Clean, simple, no disappointments. Robert was the CEO of Chen Industries, a manufacturing company his father had started 40 years ago in a small warehouse. Under Robert's leadership, it had grown into a corporate giant with offices in 12 countries. He was respected, feared even, in boardrooms across the world. Business magazines put his face on their covers. People called him a genius, a visionary, a man who always got what he wanted. But what he wanted tonight, sitting in his silent apartment with his expensive scotch, he couldn't quite name. He just knew something felt hollow, like biting into a beautiful apple only to find it had no taste. His phone sat on the glass coffee table, dark and silent. His ex-wife, Patricia, was probably celebrating with her new husband and their friends at some country club. His son, David, was spending Christmas with his wife's family in Seattle. His daughter, Michelle, had sent a text earlier. "Merry Christmas, Dad. We're in Tokyo. Talk next week," with a string of emojis he didn't understand. Robert had told his assistant, Mrs. Park, that he didn't need anything for the holidays. "I prefer the quiet," he'd said, like he said every year. She'd given him a look that suggested she didn't believe him but was too professional to say so. He took another sip of scotch and checked his watch. 8:15. In a few hours, it would be Christmas Day and then it would be over for another year. That's when he heard it. A knock at his door. Robert frowned. The building had excellent security. No one could get to his floor without being announced by the doorman. He rarely had visitors anyway, and never unexpected ones. For a moment he wondered if he'd imagined it. Then it came again. Knock, 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 softer this time, almost hesitant. Robert set down his glass and walked to the door. His building had been upgraded with those fancy video doorbells, but he'd never bothered to connect his to his phone. He leaned forward and looked through the peephole instead. What he saw made him pause. A woman stood in the hallway, younger than him, maybe in her early 30s. She wore a thin coat that looked inadequate for the weather outside, and her dark hair was dusted with melting snow. She was holding the hand of a little girl, maybe 7 or 8 years old, who had a pink winter hat pulled down over her ears. The woman looked exhausted and worried. The girl just looked cold. Robert's first instinct was to ignore them. This was New York City. People knocked on the wrong door all the time, but something made him hesitate. Maybe it was the way the woman kept glancing back toward the elevator, like she was debating whether to give up. Or maybe it was the little girl who was clutching what looked like a wrapped present against her chest. He unlocked the door and opened it just enough to see them clearly. "Can I help you?" His voice came out more formal than he'd intended, the same tone he used in business meetings. The woman looked startled, like she hadn't expected anyone to actually answer. "I'm so sorry to bother you," she said quickly. I know how this looks, but my car broke down about 2 blocks from here, and my phone died, and I've been knocking on doors for almost an hour and no one will answer." She was talking fast, her words tumbling over each other. "I just need to use a phone for 5 minutes. Just to call a tow truck or a taxi or something. Please, my daughter is freezing." Robert looked at the little girl. She was shivering, he could see that now. Her cheeks were red from the cold and she was pressing close to her mother's side. "How did you get past building security?" he asked. The woman blinked. The door was open. Someone was leaving with a bunch of shopping bags and I just came in. I'm sorry. I wouldn't normally, but it's Christmas Eve and everywhere is closed and I didn't know what else to do." Her eyes were bright, either from tears or from the cold wind that was whistling through the hallway. "Please, just a phone. That's all I'm asking." Robert stood there for a moment. 15 years ago, maybe even 10, he would have said no without thinking twice. Cities were full of scams and sob stories, but something about tonight, about the snow and the silence of his apartment and the way this little girl was looking up at him with those tired eyes, made him step back and open the door wider. "Come inside," he said. "You can use my phone." The relief on the woman's face was immediate and genuine. "Thank you. Thank you so much." They stepped into his apartment and Robert saw them both take in their surroundings. His place was all modern lines and expensive furniture, the kind of space that looked like it belonged in an architecture magazine. Because it had actually 3 years ago. Everything was white and gray and chrome, perfectly clean because Robert was barely ever home to mess it up. "Your home is beautiful," the woman said politely, but she sounded uncomfortable. "The phone's in the kitchen," Robert said, pointing. "Through there." While she made her calls, Robert found himself standing awkwardly in his own living room with the little girl. She was still holding her wrapped present and she'd left a small puddle of melted snow on his hardwood floor. He should probably get a towel for that. "What's your name?" he asked, not because he particularly wanted to know, but because the silence felt strange. "Lily," the girl said quietly. She had a soft voice, the kind that made you lean in to hear properly. "That's a nice name." "I'm Robert. Are you alone on Christmas?" Lily asked with the direct way that children sometimes do, before they learn that certain questions aren't polite. The question caught Robert off guard. Yes, I suppose I am." "That's sad," Lily said matter-of-factly. "Nobody should be alone on Christmas." Before Robert could figure out how to respond to that, the woman came back from the kitchen. She looked even more tired than before. "The tow services are all closed for the holiday," she said, rubbing her forehead. "I called 4 different numbers, and I can't get a taxi or an Uber because apparently there's some kind of surge pricing that's, well, it's more money than I have right now." She laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. "I'm sorry. I don't mean to dump all this on you. You've already been kind enough." "Where were you trying to go?" Robert asked. "My mother's house. She lives upstate, about 3 hours north. She's spending Christmas alone this year, and Lily and I were supposed to—" She stopped and shook her head. "It doesn't matter now. I'll figure something out." Robert looked at the two of them standing in his gleaming apartment with their worn coats and their tired faces. Outside, the snow was falling harder. The weather report had mentioned a storm coming through tonight. He couldn't believe what he was about to say. "It's late," he said, "and that storm is supposed to get worse. You shouldn't be out in it trying to find somewhere to go. I have a guest room. You and your daughter can stay here tonight. Tomorrow, when everything opens up again, we'll get your car fixed." The woman stared at him like he'd just offered her $1 million. "I can't. We couldn't possibly." "You can and you could," Robert said firmly. "It's just for one night. The room never gets used anyway." "But you don't even know us," the woman protested. "We could be. I don't know. Criminals or something." Robert almost smiled at that. This woman who looked like she was about to fall over from exhaustion, who'd been desperately knocking on doors for an hour just to use a phone, was worried about seeming like a criminal. "I don't think that's very likely," he said. "Look, it's Christmas Eve. You need help. I have the space. It's simple." The woman looked down at Lily, who had started shivering again now that they were standing still. "Okay," she said finally. "Just for tonight. But we'll be gone first thing in the morning, I promise." "Thank you. Really. You have no idea what this means." "You haven't even told me your name," Robert said. "Grace," the woman said. "I'm Grace Patterson. And this is Lily." "Well, Grace and Lily," Robert said, feeling strange saying their names out loud, making this real. "Let me show you the guest room. You both look like you could use some rest." He led them down the hallway to the guest bedroom, which was as pristine and unused as the rest of his apartment. Grace kept apologizing for the snow they were tracking through his place, but Robert told her not to worry about it. It was just water. It would dry. The guest room had its own bathroom, and Robert found some towels that had never been used. He dug through his closets and found an old t-shirt and some sweatpants that would swim on. Grace, but would be more comfortable than her damp clothes. "There's a washer and dryer in the utility room if you want to throw your things in," he offered. "It won't take long." "You're being too kind," Grace said. She looked like she might cry. "I'm being practical," Robert said, though he wasn't sure that was entirely true. "You can't sleep in wet clothes." While Grace got Lily settled, Robert went to his kitchen and realized he had almost no food in the house. He never cooked. He ate at the office or ordered in, and his refrigerator reflected that. Some expired milk, a few bottles of water. and something that might have once been lettuce, but he did have hot chocolate. His daughter had left it here 2 Christmases ago, saying his place needed some cheer. He'd never opened it. He made 2 mugs of hot chocolate, feeling ridiculous because he hadn't made hot chocolate for anyone in probably 20 years. He brought them to the living room just as Lily came padding out in her pajamas, her hair damp from being towel-dried. "Is that for me?" Lily asked, her eyes going wide. "If you want it," Robert said. Lily took the mug carefully like it was made of glass and sat on his expensive leather couch. She had brought the wrapped present with her, Robert noticed. It sat next to her on the cushion. "Is that for your grandmother?" Robert asked, remembering what Grace had said about where they were going. Lily nodded. "I made it in art class. It's a picture frame, but I decorated it special. Grandma has pictures but no nice frames. And Miss Rodriguez said the best gifts are ones you make yourself because they come from your heart." Robert looked at this small girl with her homemade present, and her serious expression, and something uncomfortable twisted in his chest. When was the last time someone had given him something that came from their heart? When was the last time he'd given something like that to anyone? Grace came out then, wearing Robert's old t-shirt and sweatpants, looking younger somehow without her coat and her worried expression. She'd washed her face and her hair was starting to dry. "I made hot chocolate," Robert said, feeling the need to explain. "There's another mug in the kitchen." "You didn't have to do that," Grace said, but she was smiling a little. "I'm starting to think you say that about everything," Robert said, and was surprised to find himself almost smiling back. They sat in his living room, the 3 of them, drinking hot chocolate while the snow fell outside and the city lights flickered below. It was the strangest Christmas Eve Robert had spent in 15 years, possibly in his entire life. And for the first time in longer than he could remember, his apartment didn't feel quite so empty. Grace told him a little about herself while Lily dozed off on the couch, still clutching her present. She was a nurse at City General Hospital, working in the emergency room. She'd moved to the city 6 months ago from a smaller town upstate. "Better opportunities here," she said. "Better schools for Lily. It's been an adjustment, but we're making it work." She didn't mention Lily's father, and Robert didn't ask. He recognized the deliberate omission, the way people skipped over the painful parts of their story. "What about you?" Grace asked. "What do you do that puts you in a place like this?" Robert shrugged. "I run a company. Manufacturing, it's not very interesting." "It must be interesting enough to pay for all this," Grace said, gesturing around. "Success and interesting aren't the same thing," Robert said, then wondered why he'd said it. He never talked like that. Never admitted that his work, the thing that consumed his entire life, might not be fulfilling. Grace studied him for a moment. "You said you spend Christmas alone. Is that by choice?" Robert thought about lying, giving her the same line he gave Mrs. Park every year. But something about this night, about these unexpected guests in his home, made him tell the truth. "I have children," he said, "a son and a daughter. They're adults now. They have their own lives. My ex-wife remarried years ago. I threw myself into work after the divorce, and I guess I never really stopped. Now everyone's used to me not being around for holidays. It's easier this way." "Easier for who?" Grace asked softly. Robert didn't have an answer for that. They sat in silence for a while, watching Lily sleep. Outside, the storm had picked up and the wind rattled the windows. Robert thought about this woman and this child, and what might have happened if he hadn't opened his door. If he'd been the same person he was this morning, the person who preferred being alone, who would have seen strangers at his door and turned them away. "Thank you," Grace said again, "for opening your door, for letting us stay. Most people wouldn't have. Most people should," Robert said quietly, and he meant it. Robert woke up on Christmas morning to a sound he hadn't heard in his apartment in over a decade. Laughter, a child's laughter, bright and clear, coming from somewhere in his living room. For a moment, he lay there in bed, disoriented. Then he remembered. Grace and Lily, the broken-down car, the hot chocolate. He'd given up his guest room to strangers on Christmas Eve. He checked his watch. 7:30. He usually slept until 9 on holidays, enjoying the rare chance to rest. But the laughter pulled him out of bed, and he found himself pulling on his robe and walking toward the sound. Lily was standing at his living room window, her nose practically pressed against the glass, watching the snow that had continued falling through the night. The city was covered in white, Buildings and streets transformed into something that looked almost magical in the early morning light. "It's so pretty," Lily was saying to her mother, who was sitting on the couch, already dressed in her own clothes. "We're so high up. It's like being in the clouds." Grace looked up when Robert entered and immediately started to stand. "I'm so sorry. Did we wake you?" "I told Lily to be quiet, but she saw the snow and—" "It's fine," Robert said, and he meant it. The sound of life in his apartment felt strange but not unwelcome. "Good morning, Lily." "Good morning, Mr. Robert," Lily said formally, like she was talking to a teacher. "Merry Christmas, not a Merry Christmas," Robert said, the words feeling rusty in his mouth. He couldn't remember the last time he'd said them to someone in person. "I was just about to start calling tow services," Grace said. She had her phone in her hand, plugged into a charger Robert must have left out. "I checked the weather and the storm passed. The roads should be clear soon. We'll get out of your way." Robert looked at them. Grace sitting stiffly on his couch like she was afraid to relax. Lily still in her pajamas, her hair sticking up in the back. The wrapped present for her grandmother sat on the coffee table, slightly more crushed than it had been last night. "What time do tow services open on Christmas?" he asked. Grace checked her phone. It looks like most of them open at 10. Some at noon? And your car's 2 blocks away?" "Yes, on Lexington." Robert made a decision. "Then we have time for breakfast first." Grace shook her head. "Oh no, we couldn't ask you to—" "You didn't ask. I'm offering." Robert walked toward his kitchen, then stopped. "Actually, I should probably mention that I don't have any food in this apartment. I was going to order something in. On Christmas morning?" Grace looked skeptical. "Is anything even open?" "In this city? There's always something open." Robert pulled out his phone and started scrolling through delivery apps. "What do you like? Pancakes? Eggs? There's a diner that does breakfast delivery." Lily's eyes lit up. "Pancakes?" "Pancakes it is," Robert said, and before Grace could protest again, he'd placed the order. Blueberry pancakes for Lily, a breakfast platter for Grace, and coffee. Lots of coffee. While they waited for the food, Robert did something he never did. He turned on his television and found a channel playing Christmas movies. Some animated thing with talking reindeer. Lily sat cross-legged on the floor in front of the TV, completely absorbed. Grace joined Robert in the kitchen area, speaking quietly so Lily wouldn't hear. "You really don't have to do all this. You've already done so much." "It's just breakfast," Robert said. "And besides, what else was I going to do today? Sit here alone watching the snow? Is that what you usually do?" Robert shrugged. "Usually I work. Answer emails. Catch up on things. On Christmas Day?" Grace looked at him like he'd just admitted to something terrible. "Businesses don't stop just because it's a holiday," Robert said, defensive. "Someone has to keep things running." "But don't you have people for that?" "Employees? I'm the CEO. It's my responsibility." Grace was quiet for a moment. "That sounds lonely." Robert didn't know what to say to that, so he said nothing. The delivery driver arrived 20 minutes later, and they ate breakfast at Robert's dining table, which probably hadn't been used for an actual meal in years. He usually ate at his desk or standing at the kitchen counter. Lily devoured her pancakes, getting syrup on her chin, and Robert found himself smiling at the mess. Grace caught him looking and smiled back, and something about the moment felt almost normal. Like this was something they did all the time, instead of a strange accident brought about by a broken car and a snowstorm. After breakfast, Grace tried calling tow services again. The first 3 numbers she tried went to voicemail. The 4th one answered but said they were backed up with calls and it would be at least 6 hours before they could get to her car. "Maybe longer, 6 hours?" Grace's voice went up. "But I need to get to my mother's house. She's expecting us." "I'm sorry, ma'am," the dispatcher said. "It's Christmas Day and we had a major storm last night." "Everyone's calling." 6 hours is the best I can do." Grace hung up and sat down heavily on the couch. She looked like she might cry. "What are we going to do?" she said, more to herself than to Robert. "Mom's all alone." She was so excited about seeing Lily, and now Lily had heard the conversation. She came over and hugged her mother, the wrapped present clutched in her small hands. "It's okay, Mama, we'll figure it out." Robert watched them, this mother and daughter comforting each other, and made another decision. This one surprised him even more than the others. "What if you didn't wait for the tow truck?" he said. Grace looked up. "What do you mean?" "I mean, what if I drove you? To your mother's house?" Grace stared at him. That's 3 hours away, I know. You said that last night. That's 6 hours round trip. On Christmas Day. I can do math, Robert said dryly. The question is, do you want to get to your mother's house or not? But why would you? Grace stopped, shaking her head. You don't even know us. We're complete strangers. Why would you drive us 3 hours away and then turn around and drive back alone? Robert looked at Lily, who was watching him with those serious eyes of hers. He looked at the crushed present she was holding. He thought about an old woman 3 hours north, waiting alone for her daughter and granddaughter to arrive. Because nobody should be alone on Christmas, he said, repeating Lily's words from last night. That's what someone very wise told me, Lily smiled. It was like watching the sun come out. Grace still looked uncertain. Robert, this is too much. You've already let us stay here, bought us breakfast. Do you want to argue about it, or do you want to get to your mother's house? Robert asked. Because if we're going to make it there at a reasonable time, we should probably leave soon. Grace looked at him for a long moment. Then she laughed. A real laugh this time, not the tired, stressed sound from last night. You're a very stubborn man, Robert Chen. So I've been told, Robert said. Now go get Lily dressed. I'll bring the car around. 30 minutes later, they were in Robert's Mercedes heading north out of the city. The roads were clear, just like Grace had said, though salt trucks were still out in force. Robert drove carefully, aware of his precious cargo in the back seat. Lily had been quiet at first, still sleepy from the early morning. But as they left the city behind and the landscape opened up into snow-covered fields and small towns with their Christmas lights still twinkling, she started asking questions. Mr. Robert, do you have kids? I do, Robert said, keeping his eyes on the road. 2, they're grown up now. Are they having Christmas with you? Not this year. They're both far away. That's sad, Lily said, with that same matter-of-fact tone from last night. Do you miss them? Robert thought about that. Did he miss David and Michelle? Or did he miss who they used to be before they grew up and moved away and stopped needing him? Sometimes, he said finally. My daddy doesn't live with us anymore, Lily offered. Mama says he made bad choices. I miss him sometimes, but Mama says that's okay. You can miss someone even if they weren't very nice. Grace turned around in the front seat. Lily, Mr. Robert probably doesn't want to hear about all that. It's fine, Robert said quietly. He glanced in the rearview mirror at Lily. Your mama's right. It is okay to miss people. They drove in silence for a while. Grace fiddled with the radio, finding a station playing Christmas music. Old songs, the kind Robert remembered from his childhood. His mother used to play them while she cooked Christmas dinner, back when his family was still whole and happy. Can I ask you something? Grace said after a while. And you can tell me if I'm being too nosy. Ask away. Last night you said it was easier, spending Christmas alone, but you don't seem like someone who takes the easy way out, so what is it really? Why do you do this to yourself? Robert kept his eyes on the road. The question was direct, almost blunt, but there was no judgment in Grace's voice. Just curiosity. After my divorce, he said slowly, I threw myself into work. It was the only thing that made sense, you know? The only thing I could control. And I was good at it. Better than I was at being a husband, apparently. Better than I was at being a father toward the end. I doubt that's true. My son barely calls me. My daughter sends texts with emojis instead of words. They don't need me anymore. They're fine without me. Maybe they think you're fine without them, Grace said softly. Robert hadn't thought about it that way. He'd been so busy believing they didn't want him around that he'd never considered they might think he didn't want them around. What about you? He asked, changing the subject. How long have you been on your own? Grace sighed. 3 years. Lily was 4 when her father and I separated. He wasn't good for us. Drank too much. Got angry too easily. I kept thinking he'd change, that I could help him change, but you can't fix someone who doesn't want to be fixed. That must have been hard. Leaving was hard, but staying would have been harder. Grace looked out the window at the passing scenery. I went to nursing school after we separated. My mother watched Lily while I took classes. It took me 2 years, but I got my degree. Then I got the job in the city, and I thought, this is it. This is our fresh start. And is it? A fresh start? Most days, yes. Some days it's just exhausting. The city is expensive. Childcare is expensive. Everything is expensive. But I'm doing it on my own, and that matters. Lily has a good school. We have a safe apartment. We're making it work. You're stronger than you think, Robert said. Grace laughed. You sound like my mother. They stopped once at a rest area so Lily could use the bathroom and they could all stretch their legs. Robert bought them coffee and hot chocolate from a vending machine, and they stood in the cold air, breathing out clouds of frost, while Lily tried to catch snowflakes on her tongue. This is nice, Grace said, watching her daughter. Thank you for this. For all of it. Stop thanking me, Robert said, but he was smiling. I can't help it. Not many people would do what you're doing. Maybe more people would if they had the chance, Robert said. Maybe I just happened to be the one who opened the door. They got back in the car and kept driving. The radio played more Christmas songs. Lily fell asleep in the back seat, her head resting against the window. Grace dozed off too, her breathing slow and even. Robert drove through the winter landscape alone with his thoughts. He thought about his empty apartment waiting for him back in the city. He thought about his son and daughter spending Christmas without him, probably not even wondering what he was doing. He thought about all the years he'd spent building his company, believing that success would fill the empty spaces in his life. But driving through the snow with these strangers who were starting to feel less strange, Robert felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Purpose. Not the kind that came from closing a business deal or seeing profit margins rise. The kind that came from doing something simply because it was right, because someone needed help and he could give it. They arrived at Grace's mother's house just after noon. It was a small place on the edge of a small town, with a porch and a mailbox shaped like a cardinal. Christmas lights were strung along the roof and smoke came from the chimney. Grace woke up as Robert pulled into the driveway. She looked confused for a moment, then realized where they were. We're here, she whispered. We actually made it. The front door opened before they could even get out of the car, and an older woman came rushing out, not even wearing a coat. Her face lit up with joy. Grace. Lily, she called. Oh, my stars, I thought you weren't coming. Lily woke up and scrambled out of the car, running into her grandmother's arms. The two of them hugged like they hadn't seen each other in years, though Grace had said it had only been a few months. Robert stood by his car, suddenly feeling like an intruder on this family moment. But Grace's mother looked over at him, still holding Lily, and her expression changed to curiosity. Mom, Grace said, walking up to them. This is Robert Chen. Well, it's a long story, but he's the reason we're here. Grace's mother, who introduced herself as Helen, insisted that Robert come inside. You can't drive 6 hours and not even have lunch, she said firmly. I've got a whole turkey in there going to waste if you don't help us eat it. Robert started to protest, but Helen had the same determined look in her eyes that Grace sometimes got. He recognized a losing battle when he saw one. Just for a little while, he said. Then I need to head back to the city. Helen's house was everything Robert's apartment wasn't. It was small and cluttered and warm. There were pictures everywhere on every surface and wall. Pictures of Grace as a child, of Lily as a baby, of people Robert didn't know but who were clearly loved and remembered. A real Christmas tree stood in the corner, decorated with ornaments that looked handmade, and presents were piled underneath. They ate lunch around a table that was too small for 4 people, so they sat close together, elbows bumping. Helen asked Robert questions about his life, his business, his family, with the friendly nosiness of someone who genuinely cared about the answers. Lily showed her grandmother the present she'd made, and Helen cried actual tears when she opened it, saying it was the most beautiful frame she'd ever seen. After lunch, Robert really did need to leave. It was already past 2 and he had a 3-hour drive ahead of him. But as he stood at the door saying goodbye, Lily ran up and hugged him around the waist. Thank you for bringing us to Grandma's, she said. You're a good person, Mr. Robert. Robert looked down at her, this little girl he'd only known for less than 24 hours, and felt his throat get tight. You're pretty good yourself, Lily. Grace walked him out to his car. The sun was bright on the snow, making everything sparkle. I don't know how to thank you, she said. You've given us the most unexpected, wonderful Christmas. You gave me something too, Robert said, surprising himself with the words. You reminded me what this day is supposed to be about. Will you? Be okay, driving back alone? I'll be fine, Robert said. And strangely, he meant it. He would be alone, yes, but somehow it felt different now. Less like a choice and more like a temporary state of being. Grace reached out and squeezed his hand. Merry Christmas, Robert Chen. Merry Christmas, Grace Patterson. Robert drove away from the small house with its Christmas lights and its smoke rising from the chimney. In his rearview mirror, he could see Grace and Lily and Helen standing on the porch, waving. He waved back, even though he wasn't sure they could see it. The drive back to the city felt longer than the drive out. The sun set early as it did in winter, and Robert drove through the darkness with only his headlights and the taillights of other cars to guide him. The radio played more Christmas music, and Robert didn't change the station. He thought about Grace and Lily. He thought about Helen's warm house full of pictures and memories. He thought about how easily he'd fallen into conversation with them, sharing things he never shared with anyone. And somewhere around the second hour of driving, Robert realized something. He'd spent 15 years believing he was protecting himself by staying alone, by keeping people at a distance. But all he'd really done was build a prison with expensive furniture and a nice view. When he finally pulled into his building's parking garage, it was after 9 at night. He rode the elevator up to his floor, walked down the empty hallway, and unlocked his door. His apartment was exactly as he'd left it. Clean, quiet, empty. But on his mantel, where he'd placed it before they left that morning, was Lily's drawing from the night before. The picture frame made of popsicle sticks and glitter. The family holding hands under a Christmas tree. Robert walked over to it and picked it up carefully. Lily had written something on the back that he hadn't noticed before. In a child's careful handwriting, it said, "For Mr. Robert. Now you have a family picture too. Love, Lily." Robert sat down on his couch, still holding the picture, and did something he hadn't done in more years than he could count. He cried. Not sad tears. Not exactly happy tears either. Just tears. The kind that come when something inside you shifts and breaks open and lets in the light. The day after Christmas, Robert went back to work. He told himself everything would go back to normal. That Christmas had been a strange, unexpected detour, but now it was time to return to reality. Except nothing felt normal anymore. He sat in his corner office on the 42nd floor, looking at spreadsheets and quarterly reports, and all he could think about was Lily's face when she'd seen the snow, Grace's laugh when she'd finally relaxed, Helen's warm house with pictures on every wall. His assistant, Mrs. Park, noticed something was different the moment she saw him. "You look different," she said, standing in his doorway with her tablet and her usual morning briefing. "Did something happen over the holiday?" "No," Robert said automatically. Then he paused. "Actually, yes. Something did happen." Mrs. Park raised her eyebrows. In the 12 years she'd worked for him, he'd never volunteered personal information. "I had unexpected guests for Christmas," Robert said. "A woman and her daughter. Their car broke down near my building." "And you helped them?" Mrs. Park looked genuinely surprised. "I let them stay the night. Then I drove them to see the woman's mother. It was a good day, actually." Mrs. Park smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes. "That's wonderful, Mr. Chen. Really wonderful." Robert wanted to tell her more, about how it had felt to have people in his apartment, to hear laughter in those empty rooms, about how the drive back had been lonely but not empty, if that made any sense, about how he kept thinking about them, wondering if they'd made it home safely from Helen's house. But he didn't know how to put any of that into words, so he just nodded and asked about the morning's schedule. 3 days went by. Robert tried to focus on work, but his mind kept wandering. He found himself looking at his phone, thinking about calling Grace, but he didn't have her number. They'd spent almost an entire day together, and somehow in all of that, they'd never exchanged phone numbers. It seemed impossible that he might never see them again, that they'd just been this brief, bright moment in his life, and now they were gone. On the 4th day after Christmas, his phone rang. Unknown number. "Hello? Mr. Robert? It's Grace. Grace Patterson." Robert sat up straighter in his chair, his heart doing something strange in his chest. "Grace, hi. How did you get my number?" "I hope this isn't weird, but I called your company. Told them I needed to reach you about a personal matter. Your assistant was very nice about it." Robert made a mental note to give Mrs. Park a raise. "It's not weird at all," he said. "I was hoping I'd hear from you. How was the rest of your Christmas? Did you make it home okay?" "We did. Mom didn't want to let us leave, of course. We stayed an extra day." Grace paused. "Listen, the reason I'm calling, Lily and I were wondering if you'd like to come over for dinner. Nothing fancy, just us. We wanted to say thank you properly." "You've already thanked me." "Not enough." "Please?" "Lily's been asking about you every day. She made you something." Robert looked at his calendar. He had a meeting with investors scheduled for that evening. An important meeting, the kind he never missed. "What time?" he asked. Grace gave him her address, an apartment building in a neighborhood Robert had never visited. Not a bad area, just not his world. They agreed on 6:30. Robert left work at 5, something he never did. His secretary looked shocked when he walked past her desk with his coat on. "Mr. Chen, your meeting with the investors is at 6. "Cancel it," Robert said. "Tell them something came up. We'll reschedule." He could feel her staring at him as he walked to the elevator. Grace's apartment building was nothing like his. No doorman, no marble lobby, no elevator that required a key card. Just a regular building with a regular entrance and stairs that creaked a little. Her apartment was on the 3rd floor. Robert stood outside her door for a moment, holding the bottle of wine he'd brought and feeling nervous in a way he couldn't remember feeling since he was a young man going on first dates. He knocked. The door flew open, and Lily stood there, beaming. "You came. Mama said you would, but I was worried maybe you were too busy." "I'm never too busy for you," Robert said, and meant it. The apartment was small. Robert could see the whole thing from the doorway, a living room that doubled as a dining room, a tiny kitchen, 2 doors that must lead to bedrooms, but it was decorated with care. Kids' drawings on the refrigerator, a bookshelf overflowing with books, a couch that looked comfortable even if it was old. Grace came out of the kitchen wearing an apron, her hair pulled back. "You found it okay?" "GPS. It's a wonderful thing," Robert said, handing her the wine. "I hope this is all right. I wasn't sure what you were making." "It's perfect, and I'm making nothing fancy. Just spaghetti and meatballs. Lily's favorite." They ate dinner at a small table that wobbled a little. Grace had to stick a folded napkin under one leg to level it. The spaghetti was good, not fancy like the restaurants Robert usually ate at, but good in a way that felt like home, like something made with care rather than skill. Lily talked nonstop through dinner, telling Robert about everything she'd done at her grandmother's house. They'd built a snowman. They'd watched old movies. They'd baked cookies that burned a little but still tasted good. "And Grandma loved the picture frame I made," Lily said proudly. "She put a picture of me and Mama in it and put it right on her table where she can see it all the time." "That's wonderful," Robert said, thinking about the picture frame Lily had left for him. He'd moved it from his mantel to his nightstand, so it was the last thing he saw before he went to sleep, and the first thing he saw when he woke up. After dinner, while Grace cleaned up despite Robert's offers to help, Lily brought out what she'd made for him. It was a drawing, carefully colored with crayons. It showed 3 stick figures standing in front of a tall building. 1 tall figure, 1 medium figure, and 1 small figure. "That's you and me and Mama," Lily explained, pointing to each figure, "at your building on Christmas Eve, when we came to your door." Robert looked at the drawing, at the simple stick figures that somehow captured something true about that night. "This is beautiful, Lily. Thank you." "Mama says you live all alone," Lily said, her voice getting quieter. "Is that true?" "Yes, it is. Don't you get lonely?" Robert glanced at Grace, who was watching from the kitchen with worried eyes, probably afraid her daughter was being too forward. "Sometimes," Robert admitted. "But you know what? After meeting you and your Mama, I've been thinking about that a lot. About being alone. And I think maybe I don't want to be alone as much as I thought I did." Lily nodded seriously, like he'd said something very wise. "Mama says we all need people, even when people can be hard sometimes. Your Mama's very smart." After Lily went to bed, Robert and Grace sat on her couch, drinking the wine he'd brought. The apartment was quiet except for the hum of the heater and the distant sounds of the city outside. I'm sorry if Lily was too nosy, Grace said. She doesn't understand boundaries yet. Don't apologize. I liked her questions. Kids have a way of asking the things adults are too polite to ask. She really likes you. She's been talking about you nonstop since Christmas. Robert smiled. The feeling is mutual. They were quiet for a moment. Then Grace said, "Can I ask you something? And you can tell me if I'm overstepping. You can ask me anything. What happened? With your family? You mentioned your divorce, but there's more to it, isn't there?" Robert took a sip of wine, gathering his thoughts. I worked too much. That's the simple answer. Patricia, my ex-wife, she tried. She really did. She'd plan family dinners and I'd miss them because of meetings. She'd plan vacations and I'd cancel them because of deals that couldn't wait. I kept thinking I was doing it for them, you know? Building the company, making money, securing our future. But they didn't need that. They needed you. Exactly. By the time I figured that out, it was too late. Patricia left me. The kids were teenagers by then and they were so angry. David, my son, he told me once that I was the most successful absent father he knew. Robert laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. That's what I won. Success and absence, but they're adults now. Couldn't you reach out? Try to rebuild. I wouldn't know where to start. It's been so long. They have their own lives. Why would they want me in them now? Grace set down her wine glass and turned to face him fully. Because you're their father. Because it's never too late to try. Because maybe they're waiting for you to make the first move. What if they say no? What if they say yes? Robert looked at her. This woman he'd known for less than a week who somehow understood him better than people he'd known for years. How did you get so wise? He asked. Single parenthood. It either makes you wise or crazy, and I'm trying very hard to stay on the wise side. They talked for hours. Grace told him about nursing school, about the exhausting shifts at the hospital, about the guilt she sometimes felt about not being able to give Lily more. Robert told her about his company, about the pressure of being at the top, about the loneliness of success. You know what's funny? Grace said at one point. You live in this fancy penthouse and run this huge company, and I live in this tiny apartment and work night shifts at a hospital. We shouldn't have anything in common. But somehow we do, Robert finished. It was past midnight when Robert finally left. He had to be at work in 7 hours and he'd be exhausted. But he couldn't remember the last time he'd stayed up late just talking to someone, not about business or deals or strategy, just talking. About life, about mistakes and hopes and fears. As he drove home, Robert made a decision. When he got to his apartment, he didn't go straight to bed. Instead, he sat on his couch and pulled out his phone. He called his daughter. Michelle, even though it was early morning in Tokyo and he might wake her up, she answered on the 4th ring, her voice sleepy and confused. Dad, is everything okay? Everything's fine, Robert said. I wanted to call, to talk. If you have time. There was a long pause. It's 5 in the morning here, I know. I'm sorry. I can call back later. No, it's okay. I'm awake now. Another pause. Is something wrong? You never just call to talk. I know. That's part of what I wanted to talk about. Robert took a deep breath. Michelle, I need to apologize to you. For a lot of things. For missing your dance recitals when you were little. For not being there when you graduated college. For choosing work over you over and over again. Dad. Michelle's voice sounded strange, thick. I know I can't change the past, but I want to do better. I want to be in your life if you'll let me. Really in it. Not just birthday cards and Christmas texts. There was silence on the other end. Robert waited, his heart pounding. I'd like that, Michelle said finally. I'd really like that. They talked for an hour. Robert asked about her job, her husband, her life in Tokyo. Really asked, really listened, not just waiting for his turn to talk. Michelle told him things he'd never known. About how much it had hurt when he missed her wedding rehearsal dinner because of a business emergency. About how she'd wanted to ask him to walk her down the aisle but had been afraid he'd say no. I would never have said no to that, Robert said, his voice rough. I know that now, but I didn't know it then. When they finally hung up, Robert felt exhausted but lighter somehow, like he'd been carrying something heavy and had finally set it down. He called David next, even though it was the middle of the night in Seattle, too. David was harder. He was angrier, less willing to accept apologies. But he listened. And he agreed to think about having lunch next time Robert was on the West Coast. I'm not promising anything, David said. but I'm willing to try. If you're really serious about this. I'm serious, Robert said. I promise you I'm serious. Over the next few days, Robert found himself thinking constantly about Grace and Lily. He wanted to call, but he didn't want to seem desperate. He wanted to see them again, but he didn't want to impose. He lasted 3 days before texting Grace. He'd gotten her number before he left her apartment, both of them laughing at how they'd spent Christmas Day together without exchanging phone numbers. His text was simple. How are you? How's Lily? Grace responded within minutes. We're good. Lily keeps asking when she can see you again. She wants to show you her new library book about sharks. I love sharks, Robert texted back, smiling at his phone like a teenager. Are you free this weekend? Maybe we could go to the park? If it's not too cold? Robert looked at his calendar. He had a golf outing with potential clients on Saturday, an important outing, the kind that could lead to major contracts. I'm free, he texted back. Saturday came and Robert met Grace and Lily at a park in their neighborhood. It was cold but sunny, and Lily was bundled up in so many layers she could barely move her arms. She ran to Robert the moment she saw him, hugging him around the waist. You came. I brought my shark book to show you. They spent the afternoon at the park. Robert pushed Lily on the swings, something he couldn't remember ever doing with his own kids. He'd always been too busy, always had somewhere else to be, but now, pushing this little girl who'd come into his life by accident, he couldn't imagine anywhere else he'd rather be. Grace sat on a bench nearby, watching them with a soft smile on her face. When Lily ran off to play on the slide, Robert joined Grace on the bench. Thank you for inviting me, he said. Thank you for canceling whatever important thing you probably had scheduled, Grace said knowingly. How did you know? Because men like you always have important things scheduled. But you're here anyway. Men like me, successful men, busy men. Men who usually put work first. She looked at him. But you're changing that, aren't you? I'm trying to, Robert said honestly. You and Lily, you made me realize what I've been missing. I don't want to miss any more. Grace reached over and took his hand. It was the first time they'd touched since that night in her apartment, when she'd squeezed his hand in Helen's driveway. Her hand was warm in his, and Robert felt something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. Connection. The possibility of something more. I'm glad we knocked on your door, Grace said softly. So am I, Robert said. So am I. Lily came running back, her cheeks red from the cold and exercise. Can we get hot chocolate, please? They found a cafe nearby and sat in a booth, Lily between them, drinking hot chocolate that left foam mustaches on all their faces. Robert took a picture of them on his phone, the first picture he'd taken in months that wasn't of a document or a presentation. When he got home that night, he looked at the picture for a long time. 3 people in a cafe booth smiling at the camera. They looked like a family. Not his family, not yet, maybe not ever in the traditional sense, but something that felt like family nonetheless. And for the first time in 15 years, Robert didn't feel alone. He felt like he was finally coming home. Winter turned into early spring, and Robert's life kept changing in ways he never expected. He started leaving work at reasonable hours. He stopped checking emails at midnight. He actually used the vacation days that had been piling up for years. His board of directors noticed, and some of them worried. But the company didn't fall apart. In fact, some things got better. Robert delegated more, trusted his team more, and discovered that the world kept spinning even when he wasn't personally controlling every detail. But the biggest change was Grace and Lily. They'd become part of his life in a way that felt both natural and miraculous. He saw them at least twice a week. Sometimes it was dinner at Grace's apartment. Sometimes it was outings to museums or movies or just walks in the park. Lily started calling him Uncle Robert without anyone suggesting it, and the title made his heart swell every time he heard it.